So let's come back home where Nigeria's new president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, last week signed the country's new electricity bill, which has been widely appraised as a curtain raiser for the country, whose electricity supply is at suboptimal level, around 4,000 megawatts. Let's bring in new electricity bill 2023 into context now, as we turn to my guest here in the studios. Sina Sipasi is an energy and finance expert and a partner at AELEX. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you. So it's a holiday evening, so we appreciate getting out of the house, enjoying the little holiday we can get and relax. So we appreciate your coming in for this conversation. Give me your broad outlook on this new electricity bill.
Well, it's the conclusion of a very long process. The conversation around the bill had been going on since 2021. And it is actually a vast improvement on the provisions of the repealed Electric Power Sector Reform Act. So this is a huge improvement on the provision of the Act. And the reason for this is that what this bill has done is to capture a lot of issues in the marketplace that requires tweaking in order to make the marketplace much more vibrant. So a lot of those items have been captured. There are quite a number of interventions that the regulator, NEC, has tried to introduce over the last couple of years. So what this bill has done is to bring all of those interventions to become part of the bill. So instead of implementing those interventions as subsidiary legislation, they are now part of the principal legislation. So introducing certainty and predictability to those provisions. Because previously, as long as they exist as guidelines, you have a situation where NEC may tweak the provisions of those guidelines. However, because they are now part of the legislation, many of those positions are now set, and nobody can tweak them just anyhow. You have to go through the whole range of regulatory process in order to tweak them.
It's been nearly 10 years since November 2013, right, isn't it?
Yeah, since the privatization.
Yes, since the privatization. Yes. So it's been roughly 10 years. In a couple of months, it'll be 10 years. How far do you think we've traveled?
Well, we've had 10 years of traveling, but we've not gone very far. When the privatization was happening in 2013, the thinking in the market was that in the next 3 to 4 years, the market was going to transition from the transition stage to the medium-term stage. But of course, a lot of things happened. Things with respect to lack of proper preparedness by the companies that acquired assets, especially the distribution companies, and also lack of decisiveness in policy implementation on the part of government. So where the market ought to transition to cost-reflective tariff, we had a situation where government was hesitant, and the situation where government kept regulating price and insisting that electricity must be sold within a certain bandwidth. So that really had slowed down the market, had made it impossible for the market to move the way it ought to move. It has also, to some extent, robbed the government of that legal, moral high ground to be able to take steps it ought to take as an effective regulator. So what has been happening has been a lot of short-term intervention to ensure that the market continues to float.
So we just spent 10 years, technically speaking, still on a transition phase, when we ought to have moved to the medium level. So do you see what President Tinubu has just signed as a game changer for the electricity sector? Is it a silver bullet?
It will be the silver bullet if there is that political will to actually back most of the provisions with actions. For instance, the Act, for instance, now anticipates the privatization of commercialization of the transmission company. Will that be done? The Act looks at a situation where the transmission company is not going to perform the role of the system operator. Would that be implemented? And the Act also looks at quite a number of next step reforms that ought to be done. Would those reforms be undertaken? If they were undertaken, we will certainly move quite quickly, because the truth also is that the market has learned a lot. We don't have playing in the market any longer people who are still trying to learn. No, a lot of people playing in the market already understand the market, and they understand the market in the context of our environment, in the context of our socio-political system. So they are better prepared, and I think really there's no better time for the government to actually stay true to its reform agenda and actually see it through, so that we exit, and we can exit quite quickly the transitional phase and move to the medium phase. Actually, in some way, we are already doing some of those items that ought to happen in the medium phase, which includes embedded, embedded generation is part of it, eligible customer, yes. And it also includes, to some extent, bilateral contract. And you see a situation, even when NEC was not ready, where you have quite a number of the discos, especially Ikeja disco, entering into bilateral contract with certain sectors of the society. The economy, yes. And then you find a situation where NEC regulation was struggling to catch up, with what they were doing. So you could see the market is almost ready for that medium-term stage, and we're already moving there. So it shouldn't be too difficult to start implementing. So what would
make this new electricity bill come alive? That's what I'm looking at. Yeah, we're not doing badly in terms of signing bills and putting acts together, but what will make it come alive? Is it far more on the side of the investors? Is it more on the side of the regulators, inside of those who are existing in the market, or moving ahead with the privatization that were not concluded, as it were, under the Buhari's administration, in terms of the other power assets that was to be onboarded to the private sector?
Okay. Like I said, the market can move very quickly now. But another thing to consider, this is where this new law may help. This new law somehow has introduced more players on the regulatory side. And because these players on the regulatory side are going to be governing a smaller space, they are far more flexible than a situation where you have one single regulator and one government trying to regulate what happens in the entire country. So if a player like Lagos, for instance, that has now been recognized as a regulator, both under the Constitution and under this law, right? Because this law recognizes state electricity boards and state electricity regulator. Now, in Lagos State, for instance, looking at the market that exists within Lagos State, is it industrial market? Is it certain customers that are able to pay premium for premium services, right? They can come they can come up with laws. With laws and regulations and guidelines that can actually fast track a certain investment. And there's something about this market. When you see that a particular thing is working, it's viable, there's a way actually in this market that those activities get replicated by other actors. So the fact that we have states coming into the fray with their own innovation, not having the type of constraints that the federal government has, we might actually see a more nimble market that is able to respond.
Are we likely to see more power distribution companies, the way things are going, since the states can now generate on their own? We haven't thought about that.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily because of structural problem. Okay. The first structural problem is that the existing distribution companies already, more or less, cover all the viable spaces when it comes to distribution. Okay. All of them, all the viable spaces are already captured. They are operating under a license that requires them to operate for a number of years, right? Yes, and maybe those licenses are about expiring, right? However, in their contract, they signed a contract which allows some of these the contract to be renewable under the same, basically under the same legal framework. Now we have a situation where the legal framework is changing, where the license holders think that the new regime may unduly maybe reduce the space in which they play. Yeah, it could be an issue for dispute. It could possibly trigger a change in law clause. It could trigger a situation where parties are saying that, look, what you have just done is not anticipated, and you need, even if you're going to renew my license or reduce the my coverage area, perhaps there are certain things or certain compensation that you need to make available in order to ensure.
And that's where those of you in law will be waiting. This is for your evening. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it. We're just raising the curtain on this conversation. Let's see how the implementation goes and how we move on from here. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.